Good evening and welcome to a special episode of Marketing Live for Thursday, August the 6th, 2015. I'm Rob Zenkin. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University. Today's show is Tell a Better Brand Story with best-selling author Bernadette Jiwa. Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development, web shows, and podcasts which are always free and accessible to you in the archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. The Higher Ed Live Network offers viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education and beyond, and allows viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. Please be a part of our broadcast by sharing your insights using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. Also, you can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Tonight's show would not be possible without the wonderful support of mStoner and FormStack. Marketing Live is produced by mStoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Join mStoner next week on August the 12th for their latest webinar, A Tale of Two Ink Densities, Understanding the Details of the Print Process. If you're a marketing and communication professional responsible for creating or influencing print communications, you won't want to miss this session. We'll be tweeting out a link where you can learn more and register. FormStack is an online form builder and your go-to tool for online conversions. Higher ed website conversions. FormStack makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without writing code. Build donation forms, application forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only Section 508 compliant form builder. Interact with your audience on social media using FormStack's Facebook tab or social media autofill features. For even more conversions, you can use FormStack's robust analytics data to refine your form. FormStack also partners with popular marketing applications so you can nurture your leads more effectively. Visit formstack.com to learn more about the ways FormStack can double your response rates and increase conversions today. So thanks again to mStoner and to FormStack. So let's meet our guest. It is a great pleasure to introduce Bernadette Jiwa. Bernadette is a freelance brand story strategist, marketing keynote speaker, and author of 4 #1 Amazon bestsellers: Difference, Marketing, A Love Story, The Fortune Cookie Principle, and Make Your Idea Matter. Her blog at thestoryoftelling.com has been voted the best Australian business blog. She advises, consults with, and speaks to global companies, startups, entrepreneurs, and business leaders from around the world, helping them to build their brands around a story-centric marketing strategy, one that helps them matter to their customers. Bernadette, I'm delighted to have you on the show. I know it's Friday morning in Melbourne, Australia, so I should say good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for inviting me, Rob. Really, really thrilled to be here. I was just laughing when you said it's the 6th. It's actually the 7th here, which is nice. I like it. I like that we can do that. We can cross the time zone.
Well, I was telling my oldest son that we were getting ready to go on the air, and that it was already Friday morning there, and he got excited. He thought, wow, she gets an earlier start on the weekend, and can we do that and skip school Friday morning? So
yeah, and when you travel, it's interesting. You lose days and you gain days. You arrive on the same day that you left. It's weird and wonderful.
Yes. Well, we have a half hour together, so let's get started. Like many others, I admire your work, and one of the most powerful things that you've written and we put in the show description is that the brands we really love are the ones that create difference for us. They make us feel like we belong, that we are part of their story, and they are part of ours. And in higher education, I think we all understand the power of story, that the most unique asset we have are our people, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and their stories. And we're fortunate to have such amazing stories to tell at our institutions. Yet you take story to a much deeper level, that it's not just about telling our institution story, it's how we can become part of our customer story, our audience's story, the story that they tell. So help us wrap our arms around exactly what that means and how that happens.
Isn't it interesting that we have all this, especially in higher education, we have all this rich storytelling opportunity, and we don't tend to take it. We tend to go back to the default, which is the tagline stuff, which is rankings, we tend to go back and tell those same stories. And what I'd like to encourage listeners to think about is that marketing isn't just what the marketing department does or what the advertising agency helps you to do. It's the posture of your tutors and the interactions your staff have with your students, or how the receptionist made a student feel when they came with a problem and they were trying to see a tutor. So one of the best examples I can give you is something that's actually quite personal to me and quite current. Actually, maybe I've got two. So we didn't probably get a chance to speak about this before the call, but my husband's an academic in a university. He's been a doctor for 30 years, and he actually is a vice chancellor of a medical school. And I challenge him a lot about how we measure students and how we put students in boxes and how we look to them as leaders. And he actually did something really fantastic recently. So I'll tell you the story about this. And I think this is the best kind of marketing you can do, which is change how the student feels, or somebody feels, as you might call them a stakeholder, change how they feel with an interaction. So if you think about typically how we recognize our students in universities, we tend to go for the things we can easily measure. So the students that are excelling, or perhaps, you know, helping the students that aren't doing so well. But there are a bunch of students in the middle. So my husband has this fantastic in a small department, and they get to know their students really well. But there's an amazing student in his department who she's probably not the top student, not the bottom student there, and she could easily slip under the radar, but she's one of these students who's always volunteering or organizing things, just staying back and helping other people, helping to mentor people. So recently he just called her into his office, and he basically said to her, I see you. You know, it's not just the people who get the best results that succeed. It's people like you who do amazing work and who are generous and give. And he gave her a copy of the fabulous Simon Sinek book, which is Leaders Eat Last, which I thought was actually really appropriate. And she was so moved by that. And it's something she'll never forget. And I think we should take more chances to do that kind of work.
That's great. And the thing about that, because we get so caught up on return on investment and what do we measure and how do we demonstrate the analytics, and that's not something you can measure. That's a great story that you shared, and there's not a measurement associated with that, with the exception of how it made that student feel. But yet that's so moving, and as you said, I'm sure made a great difference for her.
And so I wonder, I guess we have to question why we get stuck with the things that we can measure easily. And just because we can measure them, does it mean that they made an impact? I think that's one of the questions we can ask ourselves.
Well, you have a great post on the blog, thestoryoftelling.com, on 20 ways to tell a better brand story, and I greatly enjoyed that, and we can tweet out a link to that. Are there ones there that you think would be particularly relevant to higher education, to colleges and universities in their work day in and day out?
Yeah, I think the one, and it sort of relates to the first question, or the first thing we talked about, is giving your customers the opportunity to tell a story and to feel part of the story too. If you think about marketing in higher education, there are two big opportunities that I see higher ed taking, and that's we market to people on the way in, so before we actually get them to the door, and we market to them when they've left. And there's 3 or 4 years in between there that we don't do very much in terms of what we believe is marketing. And, you know, I think there's an opportunity there to help people to feel like they belong and to understand and to listen to the students and other stakeholders and see what actually truly matters to them.
And I think that's an interesting point as well, because one of the unique things about higher education is the fact that we don't necessarily from a marketing standpoint, everyone plays a role in marketing. As you said, marketing is an organizational function, but yet those who are charged with marketing aren't necessarily responsible for the various touch points that students have. And so those little interactions, again, like the story you told, make such a difference. And I had a feeling what your perspective on higher education marketing might be, knowing your alignment with Seth Godin. I started reading your work after hearing Seth talk about you, and I interviewed Seth for my own professional blog at universityadvancement.net 3-4 years ago, and I want to read what he said about marketing in academia. Colleges have chosen to be mass marketers, have chosen to sell above average education to above average masses of students. I get the brochures at my house daily, switch the logos, and there's not a lot of difference. There are definitely unique schools out there, niche schools, schools that know who they want and what they want to deliver, but most institutions are institutions first and lack the guts to say no, so they become mediocre. So those are some direct words. And while I know you work primarily with businesses and entrepreneurs and others, what are your impressions? Do you get the same impression of colleges and universities that Seth has or perhaps had when it comes to their marketing?
Well, I do actually. My third son has just entered higher education, so I've had lots of experience with marketing of institutions. As I said, my husband's an academic, so it's something that's on my radar and has been trend. He's right. If you think about the comment that you just made around the silos that exist, the people who are responsible for marketing the university, for telling the story, don't actually have a chance to interact with the people who are touching the story every day. And the marketing department's only a tiny part of it. So think about the taglines that we create. I can think of the billboards that have been here probably about 6 months ago, just before kids were making their choices and signing up for their preferences. So you've got the dream large type tagline, and it's on buses and it's on billboards and it's everywhere in your face, and every institution says that. And then you've got the whole university rankings and the sandstone and the facilities. And then what? What about all the universities who are in the middle? What's the story you're telling there? And what's really behind the glossy brochure? How are you helping your students to succeed? How are you recognizing their problems? How are you understanding problems to solve for them? Or are you just saying something that doesn't stack up?
It's funny that you mentioned taglines a couple of times, because the Chronicle of Higher Education came out with a piece earlier this week where they arranged 88 college and university taglines as a poem.
I need to see that.
I'm sure many higher ed colleagues saw that and got a kick out of that, but we'll post that as well for those who did not. And
so why do we do it, Rob? Why do we do it?
Yes. And they start to sound all the same, and there are very few that get at what is the essence of that institution and the experience that students have at those institutions, and what are the outcomes that they get out of that experience. It reminds me also, the president of our foundation here at Indiana University, he has a marketing background, and he often says that in higher education that we're great at talking to ourselves about ourselves. And you make an excellent point about the importance of understanding your customer's worldview. And I love your statement that we are at our very best when we see the world through the eyes of the person we're trying to matter to. So any advice, explain how marketers can do a better job of that, and if you have any examples to share.
I have a fantastic example to share, and it's of somebody who actually works in an institution. She's called Professor Linda Christiansen, and she's a vice chancellor at Swinburne University. And she doesn't just market the university, she actually lives with the students. She actually understands their worldview. She actually is part of the community. She walks down the street on Saturday. She sees them in the local area, in the coffee shops. She makes sure the university is accessible and open to them. She tries to help her students to get opportunities in the industry that they want to work in. And she tries to think about what's going to happen to them, not just while they're there, but when they leave. And when you lead like that, when you communicate that sort of objective to your staff, you can't help but win as an institution, no matter what your tagline is. I was speaking to her recently about her students, and we get a lot of overseas students in Australia. And she said one of the first things she does for overseas students, and something I hadn't even thought of, was the university takes them and brings them to the local swimming pool and gives them swimming lessons, because we're surrounded by water here, and one of their biggest fears and concerns is the safety of their students, and they're trying to acclimatize them, and they understand that they can't swim. Some of them can't swim when they get here, so they care about their students that much. They don't just care about their results on a piece of paper. They care about what's going to happen to them, not just while they're there, but when they leave. And she is a shining example. And if every institution had somebody like her at the helm, I think our marketing would be done.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Wow. It makes me think also because we've talked a lot about students, and the examples that you've shared, I think, are wonderful from the standpoint of it reminds us that the role that we have as marketers in retention in our students and our current audience. The reason we come to work every day, the reason we work in higher education, is because of students. And I think we all believe in the transformational impact that higher education has on the lives of students. But in higher education, we also have a host of others that we try to serve. And that's one of the challenges with higher education marketing. We have a myriad of constituencies. Not just current students, but prospective students, with parents, alumni, donors, and several others, legislators, community leaders, and on and on. And certainly with institutions such as mine that are multi-campus, we have multi-pronged missions. We were talking about the medical school here earlier. Mm. And you made the point that when you try to be all things to all people, you end up standing for nothing. And you've advised to build a brand one person at a time, to find ways to delight one person at a time, just as you had shared. So how might that advice translate to higher education in building a brand one person at a time, where we have so many different audiences?
I think it's fair to say that, and I understand the challenges there, I think it's fair to say that most businesses have a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different audiences, and to think about what the common thread is. Even though you say, okay, we're looking at sports people and athletes, and then we're looking at the doctors of the future, when it comes back to it, there's something in common there. There's a common thread. It doesn't matter whether you're part of an alumni or you're a student. There's a common thread there, and that's our humanity. So thinking about how the stakeholder feels, how they want to be remembered, and how they want you to remember them, and how you're going to touch them, really. So bring it back to feelings more than facts and features and benefits, and think about how you can find some kind of common thread in all of that.
Mm-hmm. It also makes me think with that common thread, just thought of another thing that I remember reading, in that you've talked about, I know you've referenced Airbnb and some other brands that have gained traction and loyalty, but they've started at the edges, and they began at the edges. And I've thought a lot about that as well, and how that might apply to higher education, especially the big institutions, and again, so many different constituencies to serve. But that thought of starting on the edge, or where are those pieces on the edge that you're truly unique when there are 4,000, 5,000 institutions of higher education in this country. where are the edges that we can really convey and about our uniqueness and uniqueness of the experience that students have. So that's another piece where your writing has challenged my thinking.
How have you found opportunities to do that, Rob? Have you thought about that?
Well, I think it's it's interesting because more and more from a prospective student standpoint, that the research that we do at our institution, the national research, prospective students are more interested in outcomes. So whereas we have on our flagship campus, where I am in Bloomington, it's a beautiful campus. It's a quintessential college experience, what college should be like, the ideal college experience, and we've tried to convey better about what that translates into outcomes and what are some of those unique student experiences that happen outside of the classroom, experiential learning and internships, and the support networks within students. But it's a challenge because I think with faculty and others, because branding in higher education is so new and is not maybe widely accepted in some circles. And I think part of that is because there's a lack of understanding of what it is. And so there's the piece of educating what it is and trying to push the envelope where we can. But certainly it's a consensus-driven environment, and so very committee driven. And I think of Seth's comments that, you know, when a committee gets involved, you round off the edges and you take away all the things that somebody might be afraid of, and you end up with something boring and generic. And so it's a great challenge for our work within higher education institutions. So I don't have the answer, but we try.
It sounds like you're doing a great job of trying. It's tricky, I understand, because you know, you have got committees, you have got levels to go through of approval, and we want to do the safe thing, especially I think in higher ed, because there's so much at stake if you feel like you get it wrong, in inverted commas. So that's why all the taglines sound the same, and that's why all the brochures look the same, and that's why we make this big push at the beginning. And then, so my eldest son, who's graduated from university, we had some amazing marketing happen while he was in the application process. So just before his exams, I'll give you an example. He got a stress ball, a pack with a stress ball and some mint tea and, you know, a funny marketing message. And it was obviously marketing, but it was nice. And the next time he heard from the marketing department was when he started getting brochures about being part of the alumni and talking about donations and contributions when he left. And probably the most impactful thing that happened to him while he was at university was an interaction with one of his professors, who actually said to him, "I see something in you," and you know, just gave him permission to go forward and dream what he could be. And that's the interaction. That's the kind of marketing that we should be taking the opportunity to do more of. Yes,
and that's also directly in line with what you've said about brand story, that it's not something we tell, that it's lived. It's less about telling and more about doing. And so do you have some examples of organizations that really excel in that regard, and perhaps examples that colleges and universities might be able to relate to, those who truly live their brand and their marketing is about living their brand, not necessarily telling that brand story?
I think the Khan Academy, I bet you're familiar with them, Rob.
Yes.
You know, that's just a fantastic story. It's not about the super great tagline. It's about this whole mission that you talked about, multi-missions, and that there are lots of missions within the institution. Well, really, to have one big mission that everybody can get behind, whether they're in marketing or whether they're the vice chancellor like Professor Chris Johnson is, that everybody can see from the top who we are, this is what we stand for. And, you know, it's like a mountain in the distance that we're all striving to go towards. Doesn't matter if we get it wrong some days. Most of the time we get it right, but that's where we're all headed. And if we've got that common goal, then everything else stacks up. We put everything through that filter, and I think that's what the Khan Academy does beautifully. This filter that they've got around free learning for everyone. It not being about the knowing, but about the understanding and the opportunity of being able to try.
And that makes me think back to your 20 ways to tell a better brand story, and the point about having a singular purpose and making yourself known for that. And that relates back to the challenges, again, within higher education, as you said, the various elements of our mission, and in some cases, multiple campuses, schools, departments, units. But again, what is that singular purpose that threads everything together? So I think that's a great takeaway for listeners today. Well, I know we're already, the half hour has flown by, but I do want to ask, because I know we haven't touched on anything, but are there any additional words of wisdom you would offer for those of us who are marketers in higher education? Are there a couple of key action items or takeaways or considerations that we should think about, we should keep in mind when we come into the office tomorrow morning?
I think the biggest thing we can all do, it doesn't matter whether we work in higher ed or marketing, or we're the vice chancellor, or whether we're a copywriter, is to look outwards and not in. It's so tempting to just be concerned with the minutiae and get really concerned about navel gazing. And that's number one. Look out. Look at what your students want to be able to achieve and your stakeholders want to be able to achieve. And not just what you want to achieve. And don't be afraid to tell a different story. Don't be afraid to try that. Try that 1 year without the billboard or without the bus, and see how it works.
Well, Bernadette, I enjoy your blog, thestoryoftelling.com, so much because it's short and impactful, and I felt like the same thing came through today in our discussion. We were brief, but so many powerful points that are great takeaways for all of us. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us on Marketing Live. It's been both informative and insightful. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thanks for having me again, Rob. Pleasure.
And thanks, as always, to M. Stoner for producing and supporting Marketing Live, and to FormStack for their great support of the show as well. Be sure to get reminders about this and other shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. I'm Rob Zinkin. We'll be back later this month on August the 27th with more content for you on Marketing Live on the Higher Ed Live Network.